Woo.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's show. Today, we are going to be talking about e-commerce, software, licensing, and pricing. We are going to take very deep dive in that. And if you're joining for the first time, this is part of the e-commerce series for WBS Rocks. We meet every Wednesday at 4:30 p.m. and we bring a very exciting panel. Some of the panelists maybe repeat, you might know them just because you have been seeing them for some time now. We have some guests as well, and these guests bring very specific expertise to the panel. We curate this panel based on their expertise on the specific topic. So today, again, we are talking about the software licensing and pricing. So we are going to be starting with the introductions of our panelists. And after that, we'll dive right into the topic. Eric, do you want to introduce yourself, if you don't mind?
Sure. I'm Eric Landmann. I'm the e-commerce division manager of Earthling Interactive, and I'm a developer. I've been working on e-commerce sites for about 12 or 13 years, built over 50 sites in a variety of different platforms.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Eric. And your expertise is going to be very relevant because sometimes the pricing is going to have the development and the deployment nuances as well. So we need to understand all of those when we are comparing the pricing of different e-commerce solutions. On that note, Laurie, do you want to introduce yourself, if you don't mind?
Yes, hello, I'm Laurie McDonald. I'm the founder and CEO of Brilliance Business Solutions. I started Brilliance 23 years ago. We specialize in digital commerce solutions for manufacturers and distributors. What most people remember about me is I worked as a flight controller at NASA before I started Brilliance. The platforms we partner with are Optimizely and BigCommerce. So really excited to be here today.
Okay, so again, I am very excited to have you, Laurie, and along with the NASA expertise, that is going to be very unique with you. You also have B2B expertise, which might be slightly rare in the room right now. So I think you are going to be providing a lot of insight of different B2B commerce platforms. Thank you so much for being here. Steve, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Steve Rice. I'm the founder of SR Consulting and .com Jungle. And we help owners and executives of consumer product goods companies make and implement wise technology choices, which can include website implementations and integrations with ERPs, as well as the sort of technological de-siloing of departments inside a company. And we've been around for about 30 years and have worked with everything years ago from Joomla and VirtueMart through Magento and WordPress and whatnot.
Thank you so much, Steve. And you, again, bring up very unique expertise from the outdoor retail world. And then, obviously, the WordPress and WooCommerce, that is always going to be part of the mix when anybody is actually evaluating any of the e-commerce platform. Thank you so much for being here. Erin, do you want to introduce yourself, if you don't mind?
Of course. Hi. Thank you for having us again, Sam. Love this experience. I'm Erin Courtenay. I'm the VP of Digital Services at Earthling Interactive. I work with Eric, and we also are B2B e-commerce folks. And I think today's topic is going to be really interesting for us because pricing comes up a lot, and people seem not to understand exactly what they're getting into, I think in part because the SaaS world is sort of driven what a lot of people think about when they think about pricing. So looking for conversation.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Erin, for being here. And I totally missed you. I think you are coming after 2 different sessions. Yeah, you always bring very exciting momentum to the panel. Always fun to have you here. And obviously, you have tons of stories that are super meaningful for our audience. So thank you so much for being here. All right, guys. So we are going to dig, deep into the topic. As you know, we are talking about the pricing and the contract. So I always like to think more from the executive perspective. Let's say if I am the CFO of a manufacturing organization, I am getting pitched by many different vendors out there. You have Shopify's of the world, you have Magentos of the world, you have BigCommerce of the world, you have so many different e-commerce solutions, you name it, right? So now let's say if I am looking at the pricing of a specific the e-commerce solution, there are going to be many different tiers in that. And in those tiers, there are going to be many different variables, and those variables have a lot of implications on my total cost of ownership. So what I am looking from you guys is, what are some of the variables that you have seen in each of these ecosystem? You can take the example of the ecosystem, or you can talk about the generalized variables that an executive should be paying attention to when they are comparing two different contracts from two different or three different e-commerce platforms. So I am going to start with you, Eric, if you don't mind. So what are the variables in your experience are going to be really relevant from the pricing perspective?
Well, there's two major chunks of cost. One would be the build-out cost for whatever platform it is that you're using or whatever code base that you're using. And the other is the licensing fees and hosting fees that are associated with hosting the site or software updates over time. For certain types of platforms, like open source platforms, a lot of the code is open source, which means it's free, but that doesn't mean it's free to build it out. Somebody's got to build it out. And also, there are almost certainly, there's certainly add-ons to the code base for modules or extensions that you purchase. Either you purchase an outright with an outright fee, and those usually come with a limited time support contract. So if you want to update those extensions, you usually have to re-up on the support contract to get ongoing support or updates for those open source code base pieces. The hosting in the open source world is usually, I think I can fairly confidently say, more inexpensive or more of a commodity, unless you get into specialty platform hosting. So contrast that with the SaaS world, or software as a service, where you're not really buying the code base, you're using a platform that already exists and adding things onto it, adding apps or plugins. Those apps or plugins can have the model of where you purchase the code, but frequently there's a monthly licensing fee every single month that ticks up the cost. And so you're comparing two dissimilar things, and it becomes really tricky and intricate to get an accurate price representation of comparing these proposals. So if the CEO is looking at these things, they need to be aware that there are these two very large categories of how websites are built out and what the overarching costs are about those things. So that's my setup. There you go.
Yeah, some amazing insights there, as always, Eric. And as you mentioned, I completely agree that, when you are looking at the open source versus non-open source, open source does not necessarily mean free. So you definitely need to assess the overall cost of the ownership. And obviously, there are going to be many different variables, especially the support that you mentioned that you should be looking at, because the support cost is also going to be relevant. So, Laurie, I'm actually going to move to you next. I don't know if you are going to add anything to what Eric already mentioned. I'm pretty sure you are competing in a lot of different competitive situations. And sometimes, the salespeople that might be on the other side of the table, they might be overselling, might not be as informed, I guess, may not believe in education. Our goal here is really to educate our audience. Right. Yeah. So what we are looking for is, and again, let me see, I think one of the trend that I see in the e-commerce space, which is very unique as compared to the other software solutions that might be there. For example, let's say if you look at the Shopify could be very easy to, let's say, just get on. It's easy, even for some of the B2B businesses, just because easy to do. But then you have that transactional price, and that transactional price is very hard to estimate over the period of time. Because I don't know how many transactions I am going to perform. If I look at my host, and my host is going to charge the percentage fee based on the payment or the transaction, I am not going to feel as comfortable. So in your experience, what are different variables that you have seen, that Eric has already covered? Do you have anything to add? Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, happy to talk about that. So I think to Eric's point, I think having an apples to apples comparison is important when you're looking at licensing. But the other thing that I would say is that really your licensing, when you consider your licensing cost, it's in many ways a function of your strategy. So like, who are you? What is your goal? What are your digital ambitions as an organization? And so, you want to think about your total cost of ownership. And are you picking a platform for the next 2 years or for the next 10? And who are you trying to compete against? So, as you answer some of those questions and think through your growth, you'll have a better idea of what costs, because a lot of times you'll have some options, like, and it's an example, like an Optimizely can bundle several different services under a single license for you that you'll benefit from a lower cost based on several different services, around like personalization or CDN or other things that may be important to your overall growth plan. But maybe that's not, your digital strategy. Maybe that's not where you're headed. And then there can be other paths that you could take, that where you're going to incrementally add on those services as you need them, but then those are different costs that you'll manage. And then I think, Eric, your point about the third-party apps that you're adding in over time, thinking through the additional costs that are going to come from those apps that you're adding in, and also recognizing that there can be trade-offs in terms of performance or user experience when you're integrating several different apps into a site. Making sure that you're thinking through, what's going to be my cost to, if you're on an open source solution, what's the cost to upgrade? Because if you're, choosing a SaaS platform, you don't have to pay for your upgrades, right? So, so just making sure you're really understanding the total cost.
Okay, some amazing points there, and I may have some clarifying, questions for you, Laurie. There, so you mentioned that, for example, let's take an example of Optimizely here. That's a great platform for a lot of different situations. So here, you mentioned a couple of things and a couple of variables that everything is under one pricing, and the variables that you are going to have is going to be CDN, and there was another one that I don't remember. So I don't know if this is part of the same pricing bundle, but can you talk about why that matters and what are going to be the pricing implications, let's say, if that is not included as part of your pricing bundle?
It's a great question. So in terms of like the structure of licensing contracts, so Optimizely based on the number of transactions in a year.
Okay.
And that's a known, it's a known agreement that's set up, and what you're paying for that duration of time. You're in an annual contract, so there are no surprises. It's clear pricing. You're able to bundle into that package because they have a range of different services around both content management, CMS, as well as commerce, as well as personalization. So AI, predictive engines to recommend products, search, which for many platforms, you'll end up paying for a third-party search platform, depending on what kind of search results you want. So those things can all be bundled as a part of a single license for you, that you don't have to be managing separate vendors, and also you can receive a lower overall cost, and then therefore have a higher ROI based on the fact that they're all consolidated into a single contract.
So, okay, so some interesting insights there, and I may have some more clarifying questions there so that, our audience is able to understand that. So you did mention that, you are going to have a couple of sub-services. In other ecosystems, you might require, I don't know if they require add-on or they are going to require separate apps. Again, there's going to be a separate contract for that. In your case, you are doing that as part of the bundle. But when you talk about the number of transactions per year, my problem with this licensing model always is, how do you estimate the number of transactions, and what exactly is a number of transactions in this particular case? Can you describe that as well? So what is the number of transactions? Is it the number of hits they are getting on the web? Is it the order? Is it the order line? What exactly is a transaction?
Yes. So we're talking about online orders over a year.
Okay.
And so if you don't have a past history, you're making an estimate of that you're revisiting with the sales team. But it's not like your pricing changes by month. You're set into an agreement based on your projected sales volume.
Okay, interesting. So I am actually going to move next to Steve. Steve, obviously, you are running into a lot of different competitive situations as well. And I don't know if you have any interesting insights from the other ecosystems where you have seen some of the crazy pricing, which might be extremely attractive, in the near term, but maybe, really bad, I guess, in the long term. So I think I am looking for those signals, and that's my problem always with the consumption-based pricing. It's great because it provides a much easier way of adopting, let's say, the digital or e-commerce for a lot of different companies. But in the long term, I guess, if you don't understand how that is going to work and how your transactions are going to play in the mid to long term, sometimes that could be very challenging for a lot of companies. So Steve, what is your experience when you look at different variables of the e-commerce pricing?
Well, I would actually say that when you're looking at SaaSes like Optimizely, BigCommerce, Shopify, in the long run, I think they're actually very reasonable. You don't usually run into a situation where you're saying to yourself, well, holy heck, now I've exceeded some number of transactions and my bill is X, and I'm not happy with that. Certainly have seen that happen inside email systems where people are all of a sudden surprised that they got a $3,000 bill from, I don't know, Constant Contact or something like that. I don't think that happens that often in these other SaaSes like we're talking about. And I think as an executive, I think that when we're talking about pricing, I don't think that we can divorce the cost of development and the cost of maintenance and using in terms of your payroll, because there are some systems that are really easy to use and some that are difficult, and there are some systems that are correct for some businesses and not for others. And what I mean by that is like Shopify is a great way to get in. And if you're say a bedding company and you've got maybe 50 products or 150 products, that might be like a really great way to get in. Shopify, BigCommerce, Optimizely. If you've got 40,000 parts that you're selling into the industrial diesel, engine industry or something, you're not going to do that on Shopify. And so it doesn't matter how much Shopify costs because there's other things you're going to choose. And that's another way of saying it actually matters how much Shopify costs, because at that point, Shopify can't actually handle it. And the pricing will be kind of crazy. And for the amount of money that you could spend on that, you probably would be buying into something like Magento anyway. So I went a little roundabout there. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, some very interesting insights there. And, I may have a clarifying question for you as well. Obviously, the assumption here is that, somebody has done their due diligence and they found the platform that are probably going to be fit for their use case. And that's the point they are going to be discussing the pricing. If the solution is not going to be fit, then that's a different argument altogether. We probably need to have another episode for that. But since you all have already mentioned that, I want to ask one question. So why is Shopify not fit for a business that is going to have, let's say, 40,000 parts? What are the challenges there, and what are going to be the cost drivers? If you can touch on those, then I'll definitely appreciate those.
I think it kind of depends on what those parts are.
Okay.
And I'm making some huge assumptions here. And I would say your question also makes a big assumption that these executives actually do know these platforms, that whether these actually fit them. And I don't think they usually do at this point. And that's why a lot of people get sold a bill of goods or just end up going down a path that most of the time they don't know what the end result is going to be, which is why you hire people like us. And hopefully we're all honest and help pave the way, right? To give an example, I guess, if you made 40,000 parts and you were pulling them in from China and you had your own distribution warehouses here in America, maybe multiple ones, I think that would be a scenario where you wouldn't want to be using Shopify because it's just not powerful enough to handle the subsets of warehouses and things like that you would need, the system would need to understand. On the other hand, let's say I'm going to make up a shirt company that, every time some new political thing happens or a baseball team wins a game, they come out with shirts. And so they've got 40,000 shirts that all get printed on demand, and they don't really have a warehouse. That could actually function really well in Shopify or Optimizely or something like that. And paying $24,000 a year for Magento Professional, or even using the free version, would just be completely cost prohibitive for that kind of thing. And part of that is that all of those products are roughly repeatable. You just can change the title. You could probably manage them in the spreadsheet. You could add 4,000 shirts in small, medium, and large, and extra large almost as easy as you could add 40. And that's a scenario where those SaaS tools, I think, can really shine, assuming you don't have those other sort of technology issues on the back end.
So very interesting comment, and I need to know this probably from the entire room, I guess, and I may be off here. But one of the comment that you mentioned related to handling of the warehouses inside your e-commerce platform, in my experience, I think that should be done in some sort of centralized system, which is probably going to be your ERP, your point of sale system. In my mind, always e-commerce is the point of sale. The way I like to think is, the only difference between your point of sale and the e-commerce system is this is done over internet. The other one is in the store. But from the functionality perspective, they are fairly similar. Obviously, there are going to be nuances of the each channel, such as the marketing automation. The marketing aspect is very different. The loyalty is very different. The coupons are very different, but still a POS system. So why are we, and I don't know if you guys come across this a lot in the complex businesses where you have a lot of different warehouses, where your e-commerce is actually trying to do something related to warehouse. So, Eric, I'm actually going to move back to you in asking, let's say if you had this business, would you handle anything related to warehouse in your e-commerce platform?
Well, yes. If you have the e-commerce platform doing inventory synchronization with the ERP system and the warehouses, then it can be done that way. That's one of the strengths of some of the more powerful open source platforms. On the other hand, there's good arguments for why you wouldn't do it that way. It depends on if you have a well-evolved ERP system that does what you need. And from what I've seen, that would be maybe less than 50% of the companies we've talked to, because there seems to be an awful lot of inadequate ERPs out there, or they're just not filling the needs fully. And inventory management is one of those things that is super complex. And I was just having this discussion today with another podcast. It's just what consists of a product in an ERP system is not necessarily the same thing as a product on the e-commerce site. They can be two different things. And so if you want to hear about that, listen to Talk Commerce in a couple of weeks. But anyway, won't get into that. So that's one of the factors. I think Steve is right on the money there. There are other factors, though, why you wouldn't choose some platforms. Generally speaking, I think the complexity of products, as it increases, it tends to knock out some of the SaaS solutions, because you can have products with dependent options. If you select this option, then that option, and that's really common in the business B2B world or manufacturing world. It's not just a widget and it's green, yellow, and blue. No, I mean, a trained monkey could do that stuff. This is way more complex than that. So that's another factor. I don't know. I rambled around there. Okay, next.
No, some interesting insights there. No, I really, enjoyed those. I don't know, Missy, I'm actually going to move to Laurie, about this experience. Obviously, Eric is talking about a lot of things from the, when you are, let's say, if you are, and this could happen in your POS scenario as well, right? So in case of POS, you need to look up into different warehouse to be able to find, let's say, if the product is not available here, is that going to be available somewhere else? So you need to have an insight into the other warehouses, that makes sense. If your store is going to be just allocated to one warehouse and you don't necessarily have the insight from the other warehouse, obviously you are going to run into that challenge. So I don't know if Shopify is going to be limited there. I know you have a lot of things to say from the Shopify perspective. Again, Shopify is a very beginning platform. It's designed for a purpose. It's not going to be fit in every single situation. So do
Sure.
your insight?
Yeah, well, commenting on a few things that we've talked about. I mean, one, in terms of, Sam, you were asking questions around, what functionality do you build into your e-commerce site versus, your ERP? And I think it ties into many things we've hit on here, which is sometimes the people in organizations know they need functionality, but they're not actually certain what system to build it in.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it happens that whatever vendor they're most comfortable with, they try and build it there. Or maybe they've got an old legacy ERP, so they build it in their e-commerce system, even though it really belongs in their ERP. I've certainly seen that. In terms of some of the things we were talking about, Steve, I really agree with the comments you made about, you've got a manufacturer that's got 40,000 parts. They likely aren't going to build that on Shopify. And Sam, you had asked about like why, and it hits on something, Eric, you were saying too, around like product complexity. I think that oftentimes that's what I see is that the product complexity in terms of like multiple variants per product or dependencies of choices for products and ordering can be something that Shopify doesn't have the capabilities to support or isn't built to support that. Actually BigCommerce has more capability around that than Shopify does in terms of complexity of product, and yet also potentially doesn't have all of the capabilities that you would want if you want something really custom, that you can customize your back-end admin and your front end really significantly. So, Steve, I know you mentioned Magento, which is a platform that is obviously extremely customizable. Optimizely also has a product that's very customizable as well. It's actually a platform as service versus software service. And so I know, Sam, you started off this conversation saying like, let's stick to talking about licensing. We're not talking about development, but to Steve's point, like and Eric, I think everybody's point, like they're interrelated conversations because it's the understanding your entire cost and understanding your requirements is going to help you. You don't want to if you pick a platform that won't meet your requirements, you're going to spend a bunch of money and at the end of it find out you need a new platform. So that's no good.
Yeah, no, completely agree with everything that you said. And obviously the fit is extremely important. If the platform is not going to be fit, even if the costs are not high, I will be surprised if that is going to really work, to be honest. That is the first question. And that is the question that a lot of you are bringing in. Again, what I'm talking about here is the assumption here is going to be that you have done your due diligence. You found some of the platforms that are probably fit. Okay, maybe, there are some nuances, but let's say out of 10, you found 3 that are really fit for the business. For example, let's say if you're a B2C business, you found 2 or 3 different platforms that are really good for B2C. And then if you're B2B, you found 2 or 3. So I am actually going to move to Erin because Erin has not spoken and we are already at 30 minutes point. We want to make sure that everybody is able to speak at least something. And Erin, I know that you are competing a lot. You review a lot more contract than anybody else in the room. I don't know, how many you are winning, how many you are losing, but both are going to have the equal amount of learnings. In each deal, you are competing with at least 3 or 5 different e-commerce platforms. So what are some of the insights or the stories that you might be able to tell from your listeners that was sort of new for you? Again, stick to the pricing conversation.
Yeah, actually, it kind of came up right away. Lori made mention of bundling. And what was interesting there is she was talking about if you know what you want for the long term, you've really thought about what you want, you can save money. So that actually applies to the whole process. In other words, doing some intensive planning, some intensive discovery, and what we call at Earthling strategy and evaluation is what will get you closer to saving money. And so that's something I'd like to have the rest of the panelists talk about, like how much does it advantage a client or a business to have really sat down and thought about what they want for year 1, year 3, and then, ongoing. And how does that save them money? Now, we've talked about bundling, but some other examples of how really good preparation can save you money. I'd like to turn that over to the panel. And I begin with Lori because she kind of already addressed it a bit.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So I think knowing that, so many times we're working with manufacturers and distributors who have been in business for 50 or 100 years and are just starting to sell online, right? So for them to think through, like over time, how much of our business do we expect to be coming in via digital? And who are we competing against in this space? And are we trying to be a digital leader? And if you can answer some of those questions, it'll start to drive what things you need to be planning on having. How many transactions are going to be coming through your site over the next, 5-10 years. So what we have seen is that, having a plan around content management, around personalization, and around, having an infrastructure set up for growth are all important pieces combined with that digital commerce. And so those are the things that we often see people bundling together in some form. On the flip side, there are organizations who say, yes, we're going to want to be there someday, but initially we want to get something up that is an MVP that we're going to scale over time, but we're not trying to boil the ocean right away, and so let's just really take a stepping stone approach to this. And so just understanding, like, what's your strategy? How quickly do you need to get where is what I think is important.
Yeah, guys, some very interesting comments there, but I'm really looking for some of these stories. I don't know if anybody is going to have stories related to pricing. Steve, I'm actually going to come back to you. Do you have any stories of the evaluation that you have done? Again, I am making a huge assumption here that the platform is probably fed. I know that there are going to be variables that are going to be driving the cost, but I am really interested in the transactional pricing, because that is going to have the huge impact overall on the commerce business, right? So from the Shopify perspective, okay, you are doing $79 per month or $100 per month. It looks easy, right? From the business owner perspective, if I look at Shopify pricing, it's no brainer that I'll probably go for Shopify just because it sounds so cheap. But when you look at the fine prints, okay, you are looking at 2.3% transaction fee. Now, I don't know if that includes your credit card processing fee as well. I don't know if they are trying to combine that, but that could have a lot of impact overall on the cost, because you are paying 2.3% of your sales. Sometimes you might not even have that much of margin. So that's a huge hit, I would say, for a lot of companies. So again, going to you, Steve, do you have any specific stories, from the pricing and licensing perspective that you might be able to share?
I do. But they're going to have to include development costs in order for it to make sense.
Yes.
I mean, literally, because I have a client that I've had for 13 years, and when they first came to us, they had 3 brands, and they had gotten some bids from companies out of San Francisco and Texas and New York and Seattle, and they were all basically about $250,000 for these websites. But these companies didn't actually do a needs assessment, which is, I think the difference between those companies and the 4 people sitting here is that we understand how important it is to actually get paid to do the needs assessment first. And even if that ends up going to another person who does work like us, because they can do that work better, because that's what the customer needs.
Amen. And that's what I was getting to earlier. Thank you, Steve. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, and this also ties in, thanks, Erin, to Lori's concept or bringing up of the MVP, which was brought up by Eric 2 weeks ago too. The story I'm telling you is those people, no one asked them what their needs actually were. And when we sat down and actually did a needs assessment, we realized that they actually had been failing at what they've been trying to do, which was do a direct-to-consumer model, because they basically were building crappy websites. I mean, it's that simple. And so they would send out an email. They had 26,000 people on the email list, and their website would crash. Now, granted, this was 2009, and you think that's a long time ago, but in 2009, websites shouldn't have crashed for that. That was 1999. And so once we did the needs assessment, we actually said, this is what you actually need. And this is what they say they're going to do for you, and none of those things lined up. So that those companies were basically out the window. So then they actually asked me, well, let's find the stuff that actually works. And at the time, Magento was kind of a baby, but was up and coming. And I think the main retail e-commerce system at the time, not main, but the one with the largest market share was Joomla Virtue Mart.
Yeah.
And I think it had like 37% market share in 2009 or 10. And when we compared it to Magento, Magento was the paid version of Magento, which at the time was $10,000 a year, had the stuff, but the free version didn't. And Joomla Virtue Mart was free, but had all those other little licensing fees, which were all minimal and probably added up to $2,000 a year. And the development costs inside Joomla were a lot less expensive. It's about 4 times more expensive to develop inside Magento than it is to develop inside then Joomla. But now I think WooCommerce and WordPress are about the same. And so we basically they ended up choosing us to build an MVP for them that could prove that their marketing department actually had a vision that could work. And 4 years, with a long-term plan, we probably would be moving into Magento because we knew that the Magento paid version would have features that would be trickling into the free version. And when those did, that would become a viable option based on the needs assessment. And that's actually exactly what happened. 4 years later, we built them into Magento, and we ran Magento for 5 years. And interestingly, they then decided that social marketing was actually going to be an important part of their new 5-year plan. And before that, they said, we absolutely don't want to have anything to do with it. So all of a sudden, WordPress WooCommerce became an important tool, at least a possible tool, where it wasn't in 2012 or 14. So they're actually in WooCommerce now because of the social capabilities. So, as far as pricing goes, once again, the MVP cheap thing to do, so to speak, was in Joomla in 2009. The right thing to do from a business perspective was to pay for what Magento could do, because it actually serviced the needs not only of their retail customers, but they had a huge back end and international customers who were companies like Home Depot and whatever Home Depot is in France, also buying from them. So is that a good enough story for you?
It's definitely a good enough story for me, but I am going to have clarifying questions because you know me, I don't take things on the face value. So one of the things that I'm actually going to ask is, okay, so you made a comment that Magento is actually going to be 4x development cost of the other platform. So clarify that. Why is that development more expensive than the other platforms? Are these developers more expensive? Does it take more time to develop in Magento? You need to clarify that and provide some substance there.
Well, it's a little bit of both. I'm going to get esoteric here and say that Magento is a very elegant technological system, and it's very complicated. The core installation of the free version of Magento has over 400 tables in its database, and nobody cares about that. But in reference, WordPress WooCommerce has about 20.
Sorry, you said 20?
About 20 tables.
Okay.
Now, in the sophistication, I think there's 13,000 files in Magento in the core installation, and there's 1,300 or 22,000 in WordPress. So the sophistication of what Magento is capable of doing out of the box is very high, but it takes a lot more knowledge to know how to use it. It's why someone like Eric is an authorized Magento implementer. I don't know what the exact title is, but he's credentialed for that because it's very complicated. So part of that, if you're a doctor and you train more, you want to charge more. If you're going to be working in Magento, you've trained harder to work in Magento. You can accomplish much more in a certain way in Magento than you can in something like WordPress, depending, but it's harder to work in. And so those people do charge more, and it sometimes takes longer. And because of that complexity, there's not as many people and or companies that are servicing Magento with third-party plugins. Whereas if you go to WordPress, which has been around since 2003, the complexity is lower. The barrier to entry for a programmer is lower. Consequently, you have thousands and thousands of plugins. And the flip side is some of them really suck and they're really written poorly because there's not a standardization that Magento has. It's just what's true.
Okay, again, sorry, go ahead, Steve.
I think I'm done.
Okay,
There's a lot of air today.
Some very interesting insights there, and I really appreciate the insight about Magento having 400 tables. WooCommerce WordPress has 20, and if you look at ERP systems, they are probably going to have 10,000 to 20,000 tables. So I'm not sure if I should be charging 20x of what a WooCommerce developer is charging, but we'll probably keep that argument for some other time. But for now, okay, so you are making an argument that Magento is probably going to be slightly more complex overall, just because it's a slightly more complex system. But if I remember last time when I looked at the WooCommerce implementation, in the WooCommerce they were using water-free, and you made this comment as well related to different plugins that you are going to require. For the most part, overall WordPress ecosystem is fairly good. But then, to be able to accomplish the same functionality that Magento is going to provide out of the box, and you are going to have far more control overall in your platform. In this particular case, in case of WooCommerce, you are probably going to require, I don't know, 50, 60 plugins. I would think that, the same is going to be for Shopify as well. So here, is it fair to say that WooCommerce is going to require a lot more plugins, but you need to know about those plugins as well? It's not so just because you know WooCommerce, just because you know WordPress, that's not enough. Because here, if you compare apple to apple, then here you have to understand those 50 to 100 plugins, and you are not going to have any control over them because it's actually built by somebody else, and you don't even have code for that.
I'm going to agree 100%. And I think one of the answers I'd give by example is if you're in Magento and you have, say, a wholesale plugin that allows for certain types of pricing,
yeah,
and you're using that pricing, and you get another third-party plugin that maybe is like a front-end tool that has its own set of pricing, the chances are very high that those two plugins know about each other and will produce the same pricing based on the rules you've set up in each of them. And inside WooCommerce, the chances are pretty high that they don't talk to each other. And that's part of the difference is that in a certain way, you could say, I'm going to say, Magento is a little bit like Apple. They have a set of rules. You follow the rules. If you don't follow the rules, you don't get it in. And so the tools tend to work together better. But it also it's a lot harder to build something like that. And in WordPress, the only rule for something to work is that the person says it works and plugs in. And it does get scanned for malware and things like that. And we double check things to make sure they don't have security holes in them. But like I said, the barrier to entry for a programmer to build something in WordPress is very, very low, and it doesn't have to care about anything else in the system. And you're right. So you might need 52 plugins, and but you also might need someone like us or Lori and Erin and Eric to go into WordPress and run the tests and go, yeah, these two things don't talk to each other, so we need to write a little script, and there's some customizations. That might be worth it for some companies. It might be, and some other companies just might prefer the more expensive plug-and-play version of Magento. It's kind of why somebody might be more interested in NetSuite as a, even though it's going to cost $250,000 to get into. Some executives are just kind of get blinders and are like, okay, $250,000 and they're going to take care of anything. Whew, I can walk away, right? That's not true either.
It doesn't know. I was going to say that I have seen it be exactly not that case. And so again,
it never is.
Right. Yeah. But well, you're promised that at the outset. So the sales cycle is a time where it's easy to get lured into this idea, right? That we're going to solve all your problems. I mean, that's the whole sales methodology of a lot of these large enterprise solutions. But when you're working with somebody like is represented here, it's your job as a client to ask those hard questions and to really put the pins in and understand and accept that there is no perfect solution. So we're coming up against that all the time, and clients that come to us and they're like, we thought this was going to work and now it doesn't, and we put all this money into it and now we don't have the budget to do what we need to do to get it to work the way that we had planned for it to work. And that's once again, where it's like buyer beware, but it's so hard in this environment. And I think that's what Sam's really addressing with trying to figure out pricing. If I had to take away from what I've heard from everyone today, it's really like there is no apples to apples. The variables are just like mind blowing. But what that also presents is an opportunity to get a solution that'll really get you where you want to go with your business and what you are hoping to achieve. So if that's helpful, I hope so.
Yeah, but
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Laurie. No, go ahead.
Well,
Please.
I was just going to say, I do have a couple things that people can look for in a contract to say, be careful. So I think, I heard you, Sam, you referenced, transaction fees.
Yes.
And there are SaaS platforms where, like, if you're not using their payment gateway that comes with them, you'll get charged an extra transaction fee.
Yes.
And so one of the things I like about BigCommerce is, like, it's not like that, right? So, like, it's a flat monthly fee. So, like, pay attention to like those terms, like are there other transaction fees, like where are other places limits that you might get charged for things, and just really be clear about that, any additional fees that you might expect. I think outside of that, it's also just understanding, we've all kind of referenced, the additional apps, but recognizing when you're comparing different platforms, like sometimes they're like SaaS platforms, you can require apps with one platform that will be built into another. And so knowing that it's not just as simple as comparing the monthly cost. So those are things to look for. Also looking at customer service. And so like you can look up vendor ratings, what kind of support can you expect? Is it just email? Do you have access to people via live chat? Do you have phone support? Recognizing what kind of support the vendor will provide to you in addition to your partner. And then if you have, for some of the products we work with, we, so for Optimizely, sometimes people will have internal development teams. I'm guessing this may be true for Magento as well, that you may have internal developers at a company who's also developing on it. Like sometimes you can get training built into a licensing contract as well, if companies want to have people on their internal team trained on the product. So those are some other things to try and get added into a contract.
Yeah, so some very interesting comments there, and I am actually, I'm gonna, add on that. And Eric, I'm actually coming to you definitely. I think you are going to have a lot of insight there. So when you mentioned that BigCommerce does not really have the transaction fee, and I want to make sure that I understand how the pricing works in the BigCommerce space, because I really don't believe in any free lunch. Just to be honest, I don't believe in any discounts. What I really believe in is, you are probably going to end up paying about the same, irrespective of the platform or the solution you are going to go to. It's just a different way of presenting the information in my mind. Okay, so let's say BigCommerce, right? So typically the reason why Shopify designs their pricing the way they have designed is because they are making it easier for the people who are trying to get into the e-commerce. But that does not mean that if you are making, let's say, $10 million or $50 million in revenue, you are going to pay the same. I mean, no free ride here, right? So that's why their pricing is very tiered. So in your case, in let's say BigCommerce, if we analyze the BigCommerce pricing, is it user-based? Is it consumption-based? Is it tier-based? Can you talk about the pricing?
It's the number of orders you expect over a 12-month period that factors into when you look at their enterprise pricing, right? It's the number of orders. So again, coming back to transaction based, but it's not a percentage of revenue. It's not a transaction fee. And so, it's my understanding that with Shopify, if you're not using their gateway, there's actually a transaction fee that's applicable there. I think if you're not on a plus plan, and Steve, you might know that better than I do. But so just being aware of what transaction fees could be relevant. The fees that make me concerned are when it's a percentage of revenue. That's different than a flat fee that's based on order volume.
Yeah, so let me try to play a little bit of devil's advocate here. So let's say if I'm the wholesale business and my number of transactions are let's say super low, and typically wholesale business is going to have far bigger ticket item. The dollar amount on the order is going to be far higher. So BigCommerce is going to be far cheaper compared to Shopify, because in case of Shopify, I'm actually paying percentage on the order volume as opposed to the the number of transactions. Am I fair in this assessment or not? So in case of wholesale, lower number of transactions, higher dollar on the order.
Yes. Well, I think so. I mean, so just to be fair, right? My understanding is the percentage of transaction with Shopify is if you're not using their gateway. So we have a lot of customers who want to use a gateway that they've already been using, right? Is our experience. So I just want to be fair in terms of what I'm stating here. But yes, you're right. So that's what a lot of times in the B2B space, their orders have a high average order value, and you don't have a lot of transactions,
exactly.
Right? And so that's where you can see a licensing benefit is when you're structured that way based on the number of transactions.
Good insight. Okay, Eric, now go ahead.
I got to step in here. This conversation is being completely skewed towards SaaS applications.
Okay.
There's a whole lot of the world that does not run on SaaS applications. And the hosting for those is metered by number of sessions, typically. Not the number of page views, but the number of sessions. So the hosting tends to be much, much more reasonable. So it's completely divorced. In fact, the number of sales is not even a factor. It's not considered. Okay. So that can mean if you get a tremendous amount of traffic, but not many sales, well, then you're at a bit of a disadvantage. But it can also mean if you get a reasonable amount of metered traffic and your average order value, your AOV is high, like for a B2B customer, if your order is $10,000 and you have 100 visitors a day to your site, that's going to be way cheaper to host something like that, because you would not have any sort of transaction fee except at a negotiated rate through a credit card gateway like AuthorizeNet. You'd work with them directly. There's no in-between person to take a chunk off your sales. So that is one of the factors that might argue in favor of an open source solution. So I just couldn't let that pass. The other thing I cannot let pass is the 4 times the cost comment that Steve, I think he threw that out there as bait for me. So I'm going to take the bait.
I am charging 20x, guys. I'm telling you.
Magento, I'm just a very quick aside. It's really the key question here is, what is the correct platform or solution at the particular stage of business that a person is in? I'm right now building out a little shop in Shopify because that's the right tool for that particular business. I would never put them on something else like WooCommerce or, well, maybe WooCommerce, but even that's not great. Certainly not something like Magento, because that wouldn't be the right solution for this particular customer. So it's really about, to Lori's point exactly, and Steve mentioned this too, analyzing what the stage of business is and what their goals are, and choosing the right solution for that particular time period. We have customers that have changed over time. There was somebody that we did a quote for that they thought it was too much money. So they went to build it out in Shopify. They didn't do their due diligence. Then they found out that their hosting fees and all their licensing fees wound up costing them over $2,000 a month. They just freaked out. They said, well, what? We didn't know this. I was like, well, okay, not our problem. So it's a question of choosing the right platform over the right life, I guess you could call it, lifespan of the site.
So, Eric, obviously, I'm going to have some clarifying questions for you as well.
Obviously.
I know that, we have been discussing these SaaS solutions so far, but we want to make sure that we are attacking all the variables associated with the hosted platforms as well. So let's take an example of and you mentioned that, in some cases, and I completely agree with you, that let's say if you have very high order volume, and let's say they are getting the 100 visitors, in that case, your hosting fee is probably going to be far lower. But if you look from the other perspective, and now this is the business, it's going to be a similar business like you, if you think about it. Okay, in your case, that is going to have much longer sales cycle. So the people who are going to be visiting your site in the pre-sale cycle is going to be far higher. So the number of visitors and the sessions that you are going to have on your site in the pre-sale space is going to be far higher.
Right.
Okay?
That's true.
Even though you have 100 visitors that are actually buying from you, they might be paying $100,000.
That
But
could be
overall
true.
traffic.
But the incremental cost is usually very minor. And I'll give you a real example. We one of our hosting providers that we use is Mage Mojo for Magento sites. We have a hosting plan that offers 10,000 sessions per month.
Yeah,
that is a lot of traffic for B2B and small customers. I mean, it's not Nike, no, of course, but it covers quite a lot of traffic for small to mid-sized businesses, and the cost for that is less than $200 a month. I mean, that's a bargain, and that's for load balanced, multiple containers, high availability sites. So it's a really good. So that's a comparison. That's one data point. Now, if you get up into, all of a sudden you got 1 million transactions a month, well, then we'd have to talk about that. But if you're comparing, so again, it's like, I don't know how you'd compare that to BigCommerce. I haven't looked at BigCommerce's pricing lately, or the other Optimizely platform, but those are all factors. Like, that's what we're talking about here, right?
Yeah, so I want to touch a couple of more points there. I want to make sure that we are addressing everything from the hosting perspective. The argument that you made about the $200 for the hosting fee, which is amazing, phenomenal value. I completely agree. Magento is probably going to be open source, so obviously you are not paying as much. Let's assume that it's going to be probably 2.5x of the development cost, if not 4x or whatever. I mean, let's just for the sake of it. I don't know how expensive the development is going to be in the Magento community, but yeah, there is an argument to be made that Magento developers are going to be typically slightly more expensive than your other platforms. But one of the things that I am missing here is the hosting provider that you are mentioning. I don't know how they are running their business, because when you compare with the other cloud providers, and again, I am actually comparing with everything. So there is no free lunch here, right? They are trying to utilize either the Google Cloud in the backend or AWS in the backend. Now, if you are running a $10 million business on a platform, and if you are not paying, let's say, $1,000, $1,500, $2,000, then somebody is not going to be happy. I'm telling you that. Okay? So I don't know where these guys are hosted, because when you are hosting in the mom and pop shop in my neighborhood, if I'm creating the data center here, then obviously you are going to have some sort of scalability issues there. And when I'm running my e-commerce platform, I definitely don't want to be running in my mom and pop shop. That's something I would not do personally, because obviously e-commerce is a big deal. As you know, if you are getting, let's say, 80-90% of the traffic, then you want to be on the reliable infrastructure.
Well, if you get deep into investigating hosting providers, you will see a trend, and the trend is that there are boutique hosting firms. There are firms that specialize in hosting, say, WooCommerce sites. There are firms that specialize in hosting Magento sites. Like, that is all they do. They don't do WordPress. They don't do anything else. That's all they do. They are super good at exactly this one thing, and they have it really dialed in. There are sites like SiteGround is one that comes to mind, that are really good at hosting custom applications, and there's other ones too. But anyway, but this is not something your CEO is going to go, oh yeah, let's go there. No, this is the job of development agencies to say, well, this is who we would choose. This is why we would choose them. Here's what it's going to cost. Here are the metrics. Here are the monitoring systems. This is everything that we recommend regarding this particular hosting this particular type of application.
Yeah, so I am extremely familiar with these boutique providers, and they are typically running a lot of workload inside, in AWS or your Google Cloud. And what is going to happen is your site is going to be extremely, extremely slow, just because a lot of people are trying to rent the space on the same server. There has to be some compromises. I mean, see, there is no free lunch as such. That's my argument.
You cannot say that all diesel cars are the same. I mean, it's not the case. There are differences among these hosting providers.
All right, amazing insights, guys.
I'm going to go with Eric and respectfully disagree with your statement, Sam.
Okay, amazing.
They're very good hosting companies that provide very fast services. Nexus is one of them. SiteGround is one of them.
Heroku.
Okay,
This
amazing,
is, I'm
guys.
gonna let you duke it out, and I'm gonna go. I gotta leave. This is exciting. So carry on and have a great day, everybody.
All right,
Goodbye.
thank you so much, Erin, for joining. We
Sure.
are going to do just quick closing round here, closing advice, guys. If you have anything, we are at 5:30 point. Lori, do you have any closing advice from today's session or any takeaways that you definitely want to mention?
Yeah, I just in closing, I think as we all kind of talked about, be clear about what your strategy is, because your licensing will be tied to that, and then make sure your contract is clear about any transaction fees. You want to minimize surprises.
Okay, amazing, Eric. Your closing thoughts.
Yeah, I would say you need to consider foremost your business stage and make sure that the solution presented is the correct solution, and then understand all of the pieces that comprise that solution and all the fees that are involved for hosting and licensing and plugins and support. Support's important also.
Yeah, completely agree. Steve, your closing thoughts.
I would suggest if you're a CEO and you're concerned about cost per transaction or credit card fees or hosting fees, that you're not actually performing the duty of a CEO, and you need to delegate better, because you shouldn't be thinking about those things.
Okay, and my personal takeaway is going to be, if you are the CEO, definitely dig deeper, because that is going to have a lot of cost implications. And at the end of the day, you are the one who's actually going to be paying the bills. So make sure either somebody in your team understand or you understand those cost factors. On that note, guys, I really want to thank you for your insights. It's been super insightful episode. Thank you so much. And guys, if you're joining for the first time, this is part of our e-commerce series. Our goal is to educate our community, really build the awareness about different options that you have in the e-commerce space. Each week we pick one topic and meet on Wednesday at 4:30 p.m. Eastern. So don't miss next week's episode. On that note, again, thank you so much, guys, for joining.
Thank you, Sam. It's been wonderful. Appreciate the work.
Yeah, thank you. It's been fun.
Bye.